I was supposed to inherit the legacy, not because I demanded it, not because I fought for it, but because I earned it. My name is Victoria Hale, and for the first 28 years of my life, I lived in the shadow of a promise no one had the courage to say out loud that I would take over Hale and Sons. Even though I wasn't a son, my grandfather founded the company, my father expanded it, and I quiet, calculating, invisible me, I made it profitable. They called me the whisper in the walls. I streamlined our logistics division, restructured our hemorrhaging Latin America portfolio, and designed the digital infrastructure that saved us during the 2008 crash. But no one ever gave me a title, because titles weren't for daughters, they were for heirs. And my brother, Ethan, was the heir. I didn't mind, at least not at first. I told myself it was enough to be useful, to be loyal, to protect the name. It wasn't until my father fell ill that I realized how naive I'd been. He'd had a stroke, a silent one, subtle but devastating. The doctor said it would be a long road back. Maybe he'd speak again. Maybe not. And while he slept in a hospital bed, barely able to move one side of his body, the family convened, not at the hospital. No. They held the meeting at the lake house, the same lake house where we used to spend every 4th of July as kids. But this time, there were no sparklers, no laughter, just stiff suits, tense voices, and the stench of power changing hands. I wasn't invited, but I found out from my cousin who texted me. They're voting on interim leadership. You should be there. I showed up unannounced. Ethan was already seated at the head of the table. Aunt Clarissa, Dad's sister and longtime board member, stood to the side like a general preparing to crown her chosen prince. When I walked in, the room went silent. Then Clarissa smiled too wide. "Victoria," she said sweetly, "I didn't expect you. This is a board matter." I sat down anyway. They didn't argue about Ethan's qualifications, because he didn't have any. He hadn't worked a full fiscal year in any department. He dropped out of 2 Ivy League schools and spent most of his 20s hosting silent retreats in the Maldives. But he was charming, and loud, and male, and that was all they needed. I asked one question, just one. If we're voting on leadership, where is the succession plan? Dad wrote silence. Clarissa blinked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. "There is no formal succession plan," she said smoothly. "It was never filed. Your father, well, his mind wasn't what it used to be. We're doing what's best for the company." I laughed, quietly, bitterly. Because I had seen the plan, I helped him write it. He named me as interim CEO, with Ethan to serve only after a 3-year mentorship under me. But the document never made it to legal. Clarissa made sure of that. And now, they were erasing me like I was a misprint on a press release. By the end of the meeting, it was official. Ethan was named acting CEO. I was relieved of operational duties to avoid internal conflict during transition. They didn't fire me with security guards or headlines. No. They stripped me of power with smiles and fake concern. "We just want to avoid family tension. Why don't you take a sabbatical? This is temporary. You'll always be part of the Hale family." I didn't say a word. I just stood up and walked out. Not just from the room, but from the legacy I built with bleeding hands and sleepless nights. They didn't realize it then, but that was the day they made their last smart decision. Because when you take everything from someone who built it brick by brick, you leave them with nothing to lose. And people with nothing to lose, they build empires. I sat in my car for hours that night, didn't drive, didn't cry. I just let the silence settle. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was a surgical kind of clarity, a clean, cold awareness of where I stood. They underestimated me. They always had. They mistook my silence for submission, my caution for cowardice, my restraint for weakness. But silence can be a strategy. Stillness can be a seed. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I wouldn't fight them for their sinking ship. I would build something they'd drown trying to reach. I didn't start with a plan. I started with silence. 3 days after they pushed me out, I found myself sitting in the back corner of a rundown coffee shop on 14th Street. Black coffee, no cream, no sugar, laptop open, fingers still trembling from the humiliation I refused to name. It smelled like burnt espresso and forgotten dreams. Perfect. I chose the seat closest to the wall, where no one could sneak up behind me. And every day, I returned to that same corner, not to mope, but to watch. See, when you've been trained to serve a family that never intended to hand you the crown, you learn to observe, to read lips in glass reflections, to remember who whispered during board meetings, to spot who made decisions, and who only nodded. That coffee shop became my listening post, my breathing room, my war room, and from there, I began to build. I started small, freelance consulting, no LinkedIn posts, no website, no press. I offered discreet strategy packages to failing mid-sized companies. Most were hemorrhaging money from decisions so arrogant. I almost laughed. I didn't need to market myself. I just fixed things. One founder referred me to another, then another. And suddenly, I was turning tech graveyards into living organisms again. But I still didn't speak my name. Not yet. I wanted to earn every piece of power I would one day wield without the Hale name softening my path. One morning, a man walked into the shop and sat 2 tables away, khaki pants, frown lines, holding a pitch deck that looked like it had been through 5 rounds of divorce. He was trying to sell a logistics platform to a VC. I listened, quietly. And when the pitch ended, the investor stood, shook his head, and walked out. I watched the man sink into his chair like wet paper. Then I stood up, walked over, and said 5 words I know why they said no. He looked at me like I'd just ripped the last thread of his dignity. But then he asked me to sit. 3 hours later, I had restructured his entire model on the back of 3 napkins and a cold croissant. 2 months after that, his company secured $7.2 million in funding based on the strategy I built him in silence. He called me a ghost, said I was the kind of operator who never shows up in press releases, but always sits behind the throne. I didn't correct him, because I wasn't ready for the throne. I was still collecting maps of enemy territory. By month 4, I had quietly advised 5 startups. 3 of them had turned a profit. 1 had just been acquired by a Fortune 500. The 5th, it was dying but interesting. A biotech firm with messy leadership and a brilliant CTO who couldn't speak in boardrooms without shaking. They needed someone who could translate genius into strategy. So I stepped in, not as a partner, not as an exec, but as a shadow. I rewrote their decks, redesigned their ops, whispered behind curtains. And when they closed their Series B at 10x expected valuation, they tried to put me on their board. I declined, because I was busy laying the groundwork for something else, something bigger. I called it Aurelia Group, Latin for the Golden One. I registered it under an LLC in Delaware. No public board, no family name, no paper trail that led to Victoria Hale. It started as a shell company. Then I filled it bit by bit with the best people I'd ever worked with. Not the loudest, not the flashiest, but the ones who had been passed over, overlooked, stepped on. The analysts who caught everything and were thanked for nothing. The engineers who fixed problems but never pitched. The marketers who built campaigns but were too soft-spoken to lead. I gave them salaries above market. Equity, too. But more than that, I gave them a seat at the table no one else let them in on, and I gave them only one rule: we build in silence, and we never beg for a seat we can buy. Meanwhile, Hale and Sons was starting to bleed. I watched from afar as Ethan fumbled through press interviews he didn't understand. He tried to mimic language he heard in boardrooms, without knowing what any of it meant. Aunt Clarissa hired expensive consultants. They recommended layoffs, rebrands, overpriced tech, all bandages, no surgery. They didn't know the foundation was already cracking, because I had built that foundation. And now I was feeding their competitors everything I knew about how to beat it. But I wasn't done, because real revenge is not chaos, it's architecture. And I was still sketching. In month 7, I took a call from an old Hale vendor. They were being dropped by the family company for cheaper options. I made them a quiet offer. We became their largest client within 2 weeks. No headlines, no noise, just a redirection of trust. Then a mid-level executive from Hale & Sons, one who once looked me in the eye and voted to remove me, sent in a resume to Aurelia Group. She didn't know it was mine. She just knew it was rising fast. And people were whispering about the firm with the Midas touch. I scheduled an interview, watched her speak, and for the first time, I didn't feel rage, just clarity. "Thank you for coming in," I said. "We'll let you know." I never did, because this wasn't about taking them down. Not yet. It was about building something so undeniable they'd have to crawl back just to breathe the air near me. I sat in that coffee shop for almost a year, every corner of it. I turned into a piece of strategy. Every connection, every failure, every quiet nod, I filed it away like blueprints. People thought I had disappeared, but I was only becoming more visible, to the right kind of eyes. And when the moment came, when they finally called me, desperate, shaken, needing an investor, I didn't pick up the phone. I made them wait, because power, real power, doesn't shout. It arrives quietly and makes everyone else go silent. The first time I saw Hale & Sons on the front page again, it wasn't for innovation, it was for failure. A leaked memo, layoffs, 3 major accounts pulled out in 1 week. I didn't smile, but I did stir my coffee a little slower that morning. The headline said, "Legacy Firm Struggles to Adapt in Modern Market." What they didn't know was that every string that unraveled their empire had passed through my hands first. You see, when you've spent your life building a machine, you know which gears to loosen. I didn't sabotage them. I didn't hack their servers. I didn't bribe their executives. No, all I did was exist, in a different lane, at a different speed. But with the exact same blueprint they stole from me. And because I'd built it first, I knew exactly where to press. It started with vendors. The ones they replaced with cheaper alternatives, I welcomed them. Not with contracts, but with partnership. They didn't just work for Aurelia Group. They worked with us. We gave them equity. We gave them dignity. We gave them what Hale & Sons never could, a reason to fight for something that wasn't born in nepotism. So when Hale tried to crawl back, desperate for better service, they found closed doors and long memories. Then came clients. Most of them stayed loyal to Hale out of habit, not satisfaction. I didn't poach them. I just waited until Hale overpromised and underdelivered. Then I sent an anonymous pitch, 1 slide deck, 1 line. What if your strategy didn't have to make excuses? No logo, no name, just results. We called it ghost contracting, delivering solutions under white labels, letting the results speak while the brand stayed invisible. They didn't know they were working with me, but I knew they were working for my rise. Inside Hale & Sons, chaos bloomed. Ethan was flailing. The board was fracturing. Clarissa, once the queenmaker, now sat in silence during meetings, watching the numbers fall like ash. They tried to hire a turnaround firm. I knew the founder of that firm personally. We'd worked together 2 years ago. He owed me a favor, so I whispered, "Tell them what they want to hear," and stall. And he did. For 6 months. He billed them for meetings, diagnostics, team audits. He never fixed anything. Because the truth was, the rot wasn't in the numbers. It was in the bloodline. One by one, their executives resigned, not to me, but to companies I had invested in quietly through Aurelia. They never saw the connection, never traced the dots. Because when power doesn't crave the spotlight, it moves like fog. Every acquisition Aurelia made was surgical. We didn't announce them with press releases or photo ops. We absorbed them, cleanly, quietly, and in every single one. There was a heartbeat I had once been told to ignore: women, immigrants, mothers, the ones who were always too much or not enough. I gave them space to grow, and they grew into forests that blocked out the sun Hale had once basked in. Then came the breaking point. One of Hale's cornerstone accounts, a multinational supply chain partner, walked away. Not because of price, not because of scandal, because of incompetence. And who did they turn to? Aurelia Group. I was in my office when the email came through, subject line: urgent proposal, mutual interest. They still didn't know the company was mine, just that it was dangerously effective. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Let's schedule a call." And just like that, they opened the door. During that call, I didn't speak. I let my COO lead, a woman they once dismissed as too young to negotiate. She handled the entire deal like a concerto, measured, precise, lethal. When the contract was signed, I forwarded a single message to Ethan. No subject, no greeting, just a link. To an announcement scheduled to go live in 24 hours. Aurelia Group acquires Hale & Sons key account in exclusive partnership. No logos side by side, no we're honored to collaborate. Just a clean transaction and a clean cut. The next day, Ethan called. I didn't answer. So he tried again and again. Then a text. "Are you behind this?" I typed. Then deleted. Paused. Then finally sent, "I don't need to be behind anything. I am everything you didn't see coming." He never replied. But the next day, Clarissa emailed me, cold, corporate, contained. "We'd like to schedule a conversation regarding possible restructuring and mutual opportunity." And that, homie, was when I knew they were on their knees. They thought I vanished. They thought I disappeared, crumbled, faded. But I had been pulling every string, every whisper, every loss, every silent walkout. They thought I was weak because I didn't scream, but I was never silent. I was scripting their ending. And now the final scene was mine to write. It started with a knock on the wrong door. Not mine. I never gave them that access. It was my legal team, quiet assassins in tailored suits, who first received the request. The subject line read, "Proposal for Strategic Partnership and Recapitalization from Hale & Sons." I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was poetic. The same company that once called me too emotionally involved to lead was now asking if I had space on my calendar. I let them wait 4 days, 4 deliberate, echoing days. Then I responded, not directly, through a third-party intermediary, a firm they'd never associate with me. I didn't sign the name Victoria Hale. I signed it Aurelia Capital Holdings. And I made the terms very clear. We're open to a private conversation, in person. One condition, full transparency. No lawyers in the room. You sit, you listen. They agreed. Desperation always does. We met at a high-rise boardroom downtown. Neutral ground. Frosted glass. Long table. No names. Ethan was the first to arrive. He looked thinner. Paler. That youthful arrogance had slipped into something. Hollow. He smiled like it meant something. "Victoria, you look powerful." I didn't return the smile. That's because I am. Clarissa arrived next, still composed, still dangerous, but with eyes that flickered like she knew her grip on the game board had been broken. She extended her hand. I didn't take it. We sat in silence for 12 seconds. I counted. Then Ethan leaned forward. "We know we made mistakes. The market shifted faster than we expected. There were leadership challenges." He was spiraling already, reciting pre-approved damage control statements. I raised a hand. "Stop." He did. I stood up and walked to the window. 27 stories below. The city buzzed like a hive, each person rushing toward something they hoped would save them. I turned back around. "This isn't a partnership conversation. You're not negotiating. You're applying." Clarissa narrowed her eyes. "Excuse me, you're applying to be absorbed," I said, "by a company you don't even realize I own." Silence. Ethan blinked. "You own Aurelia." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I slid a folder across the table. Cream cardstock, heavy weight. The kind of paper that doesn't bend, doesn't flinch. Inside was a term sheet, but not just any term sheet. It was a correction. For every slight, every stolen credit, every insult dressed as concern. Terms: 51% acquisition of Hale & Sons under Aurelia Group. All senior leadership to submit resignations, effective immediately. Clarissa permanently barred from board positions in any Aurelia-held companies. Ethan may apply for a junior consultant role, subject to multi-phase assessment. The company will be renamed Hale Legacy Solutions, a subsidiary. Final clause. All prior leadership will agree to a public statement of transition. acknowledging past failures and endorsing Aurelia's vision going forward. Clarissa's voice dropped. This is punitive. I looked at her, dead calm. No, this is exact. You fired me without cause. You stripped me of everything but my name. And now, I'm giving you a chance to keep yours barely. Ethan swallowed hard. There's no dignity in this. You're right, I replied. But there is survival. They asked for time to discuss. I gave them 10 minutes, not 11. When they returned, Clarissa's jaw was clenched. We accept, but on one condition. I didn't let her finish. You're in no position to set conditions. She flinched. That was the first real crack in her porcelain control, and that was enough for me. As the contracts were signed, I watched their hands shake. Ethan avoided my eyes. Clarissa signed with tight lips, pressing the pen like it owed her something. When it was done, I stood. Thank you for your time, I said. They hesitated. What now? Ethan asked. I walked toward the door, then paused. Now you show up Monday morning, 8 a.m., and you learn how to work for a woman. That evening, I poured a glass of red wine, not to celebrate, but to acknowledge. I had waited so long for this moment, so many nights replaying boardroom conversations in my head, so many silent surrenders waiting for one final, glorious reversal. But now that it had arrived, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure, like I had finally truly ended the chapter they tried to write me out of. I looked down at the signed contract on my desk, the ink still drying, and I smiled just a little, because the truth is, this was never about revenge. This was about correction. And sometimes, correction comes in the form of a contract. The first morning Ethan walked into the office as an employee, he was 15 minutes late. I knew, because I was already there. Glass walls, second floor, looking down. He didn't know I was watching, but I was. He hesitated at the entrance, unsure if he should use the same door he used when he was CEO. He reached for the brass handle, then pulled his hand back like touching it burned. He took the side entrance instead. I smiled. Not from spite, from understanding. He was finally learning what it felt like to earn entry, instead of expecting it. The office didn't look the same anymore. The marble floors were gone. So were the family portraits. I had replaced them with live moss walls. Quiet, breathing green. A reminder that everything alive must adapt or die. The main conference room was renamed the Foundry. That's where I forged the future. I banned the use of the word legacy, because legacy implies inheritance. And what I had built was not inherited. It was created. Under pressure. Alone. In silence. This wasn't a company born from bloodline. It was born from fire. Ethan's first assignment was small, a market audit. He botched it. I didn't reprimand him. I returned the document, marked in red, try again. This time, do it like someone whose job isn't guaranteed. No signature, no title, just a single line at the top. V, H. He got the message. That week, he stayed late every day. And I let him. Because humiliation is easy. Correction takes discipline. Clarissa, she disappeared. She declined the board position she was offered one I included only for legal cushioning. Word spread she moved to another state. Started a consulting firm. But she never recovered. You don't come back from watching the empire you built without you. Some people never learn to live in someone else's narrative, especially when they once authored yours. But I never wanted to erase her. I only wanted her to understand power doesn't belong to those who speak the loudest. It belongs to those who never needed to scream. Hale and Sons was gone. On paper, it became Hale Legacy Solutions, a subsidiary of Aurelia Group. But in practice, it was something else entirely. The team changed. The energy changed. The walls themselves felt different. Because people no longer walked in with entitlement. They walked in with purpose. I hired people who had been turned down for not being cultural fits. Mothers returning from leave. Immigrants without Ivy League degrees. Founders who failed once but learned 10 times more than those who hadn't. They weren't safe bets. They were survivors. And I trusted survivors, because that's what I had been. 6 months later, Forbes requested an interview. They wanted a headline, Daughter Dethrones Dynasty. How Victoria Hale Took Her Family's Empire. I declined. I wasn't interested in being framed as a takedown artist. I wasn't interested in revenge porn masquerading as a feature. I had no desire to be the woman who beat the men. Because I didn't beat them, I outbuilt them, outlasted them, and most of all, I outgrew them. The only interview I gave that year was to a university podcast. A young woman asked me, "What advice would you give to someone who's been told they don't belong at the table?" I paused, then said, "Don't fight for their table. Build your own. Make it so strong, they'll ask if they can sit down. And when they do ask them to show their resume," she laughed. I didn't, because I wasn't joking. Today, my office still sits on the second floor. No nameplate, just glass. People often ask me, "Why don't you take the top floor?" And I always give the same answer, because power isn't about being above others. It's about seeing everything clearly from this floor. I see the engineers working late. I see the interns who ask hard questions. I see the ones like me, the ones who watch, wait, listen. And I remember that girl, the one who once sat in the back of a coffee shop with nothing but a broken laptop and a fury she couldn't name. She didn't want revenge. She wanted redefinition. So, no, I didn't take back the company. I replaced it. I replaced every assumption, every system, every gate, and now the name Hale still sits on buildings. But when people say it, they're not thinking about the dynasty, or the bloodline, or the man who started it. They're thinking about me, the woman who wrote a new story, without raising her voice,